You're watching a special edition of Going Underground. I'm Afshin Rattansi, and coming up in the show...
So Bashar would invite inspectors in, give them carte blanche to come into rebel territory, and then stage a gas attack. I mean, it didn't make the smell test.
Government lies and corruption. Pulitzer Prize winner Seymour Hersh exposes the truths state and corporate media won't touch. We speak exclusively to him at London's Logan Symposium against secrecy, surveillance and censorship. And is contemporary art the new voice of political conscience?
They break the system. They change everything of the world, because they remind us how much is important, how is important to know the truth. So my responsibility, like artist, is to tell what's the world.
Plus, why is the British press telling us an Al-Qaeda Christmas spectacular to blow up 5 passenger planes is almost inevitable? All this and more on today's Going Underground. The all-party parliamentary inquiry into hunger and food poverty publishes its report today. While some may laud the findings in today's report, perhaps they should reflect on one of its authors' right-wing credentials. Frank Field, the Labour MP who became David Cameron's poverty czar, is a co-author. He's the Iraq war-supporting parliamentarian who in the past has appeared to blame poor parents for poor outcomes.
There are clearly some parents who, if I'd had them as a parent, I literally wonder whether I'd ever survive childhood.
Too much blame on parents instead of austerity policies to bail out bankers? Field supports compulsory conscription to instill order and patriotism. And this is what he said about Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Under her rule, no developed state except New Zealand suffered as brutal a widening of inequality. Trade unions were the enemy.
One of her great struggles was to bring the trade unions within the law that this House decided would be the law, not the law which the trade unions thought that they would abide by. I've been perplexed by some of the coverage of Mrs. Thatcher's stewardship in the paper in the last few days, saying that the country was ungovernable. It was governable, all right, but it wasn't governable from here or the government that was elected by the people.
Frank Field slamming worker power via the trade unions there. Who better to author a report widely praised in the mainstream on poverty? In the past few days, Cypriot sources have claimed Britain has been flying yet more bombing raids near Fallujah in Iraq. Tornado GR-4 warplanes based in Akrotiri have been firing £30,000 pave-way 4 bombs and £100,000 brimstone missiles at impoverished areas west of Baghdad. Seymour Hersh, the Pulitzer Prize winner, exposed war crimes in Iraq when he published his stories about American torture in Abu Ghraib prison. His journalistic scoops famously include the expose of the killing of hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians in the My Lai massacre. This was, of course, just one part of the American war in Vietnam, which cost an estimated 3 million Vietnamese lives. Most recently, he was forced to publish in the UK a story that cast doubt on David Cameron's claims used to justify British bombing of Syria. Now, working on a new scoop about ISIS, we caught up with him at the Logan Symposium in London against secrecy, surveillance and censorship. We're at the Logan Symposium in London. With me is arguably one of the greatest journalists of the 20th century, Seymour Hersh. Seymour Hersh, let's begin with Britain being at war in Iraq again. You wrote previously about a redirection of White House policy under Bush-Cheney. Is the redirection now manifesting itself in the war against ISIS?
What I wrote was this article that said sometime around 2006 and 2007, in the Bush administration, they decided that they were going to really make it clear to everybody that we were pro-Sunni. We were going to support the Sunnis. It was part of what they, you know, I guess you could call it, it was part of the end of the game, the change in the policy in Iraq. We were going to start financing some of the radical Sunni jihadist militias, and we were going to work with Sunnis around, the Saudis in particular, the Jordanians, even the Israelis were in on this. We were going to work against, the targets were the Shia in Iran, Hezbollah, Bashar Assad. They were the targets, and even Hamas was a target, although the Sunni. That was okay. They could change the rules a little bit, And the game plan was we were going to finance Sunni jihadists. So we're seeing an impact there. ISIS has come out of that, emerged partly because of the behavior of the Iraqi government under Maliki, who was very hostile, a Shia who was very hostile to the Sunnis, and partly because of that, and partly because that's just what happened.
What about the jokes back then that people in intelligence or politicians didn't even know the difference between Sunni and Shia?
I mean,
it was just a joke.
Well, no, it wasn't just a joke. I mean, ignorance is, people who fight wars are not the cream of the crop. I mean, so generals, de Tocqueville, the great French scholar, spent time in America, and he wrote a series of books about it, wonderful books. And in one of the books, he describes the problems with democracy. One of the big problems in democracy is, in the rest of the world, the undemocratic world, royal families become leaders of the military. It's just in England, for example, still now, they have knights and they get knightships in it. But in a democracy like America, anybody can be a general. And so the way you get to be a general, he said, was you have to have wars and you have to kill a lot of people. And so therefore, there's something inherent contradiction in democracy, which is democracies are always going to be led by people who push for more war and more blood, because that's one of the ways the average man can get up and standing, unlike in Western Europe where the royalty did it. So that was an interesting side. So we have a problem generically. Military, the generals often aren't, they want to fight their wars, they want to make their wars. And so the surge, for example, that we claim ended the war in Iraq simply was a decision we made after years of not doing it, of supporting those Sunni jihadist groups, many of them filled with former military people, former members of the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, that they couldn't work, they couldn't get any jobs. If you remember, we disbanded the army and cut off their salaries. So they went to work they went to work against the Americans with Al-Qaeda. We started paying them. They began to kill Al-Qaeda. Maliki came in, the Shia. He did nothing to improve conditions of life for the Sunnis. In fact, it's been a war there for 5 years that we don't want to talk about. And now we have ISIS that emerged out of it. So, and now who's going to be fighting ISIS? Well, it turns out it's going to be the Syrian army, which is probably emerged as one of the best armies right now in the Middle East. It's battle-tested. Hezbollah came and taught them a lot about how to fight. There's no question Hezbollah played a role in telling the Syrian army that the way you fight is you go in boots on the ground. You kill and be killed. You don't do the standoff American bombing, and then
which is happening in Kobani now. And Hezbollah, of course, still a proscribed group, despite them in effect helping the American and British.
Well, we
war
have an
effort.
amazing situation now, which is Iran clearly is working in coordination with us on bombing, and clearly working with the Syrian Air Force on bombing. They're all bombing inside Iraq. It's unspoken. Nobody wants to talk about it.
Tehran, Washington, and London have all denied that.
Well, of course. Duh. I mean, somebody denies something, that means it isn't true. I mean, there's no question something's going on. I mean, it's right there. It's obvious. Air Force pilots do not go. You do not have a situation where recently there was a bombing in Raqqa, which is the capital. We think it's where the ISIS headquarters is. And the American Air Force, our planes bombed. And then a few minutes later, literally within an hour, the Syrian Air Force came in and bombed again. Excuse me, Air Forces do not work without coordination. And that's the reason you're seeing this sort of surprising series of airplane raids that seem to be unconnected. But of course, come on, common sense would tell you, Air Forces don't fly where there's other Air Forces. They have to clear, and it has to be controlled.
Now, in Britain, we had a parliamentary vote, famously. The Prime Minister here wanted to do exactly what you were saying people shouldn't do, which is airstrikes on Damascus, presumably. Everyone in Britain very happy that your article had to be published in Britain, because in the land of the free, you couldn't. Tell me a bit about the chemical weapons in Ghouta piece that cast doubt on the official narrative that it was clear that President Assad launched a chemical attack in the Damascus suburbs.
It's far, I'm not going to put my right arm on it, but it's very clear that the story that emerged that Bashar used sarin is very problematical. It just is. It's just a very clear story. First of all, common sense says he had just invited a UN inspection team, which was inspecting previous instances of use of chemicals, including sarin, in March and April. That's what they were there to do. And one of the findings they had that later became known as that was an incident in March clearly was not done by the Syrian government. Clearly it was done by al-Nusra. That was a finding they had. They don't make it public, but everybody knows, that's understood, that it was, I think, middle of March, March 19th, there was an incident in which they were very clear that it came from the opposition. And so Bashar would invite inspectors in, give them carte blanche to come into rebel territory, and then stage a gas attack. I mean, it didn't make the smell test. So that was the first problem. The second problem is that we did get, as I wrote, the Russians recovered some sarin samples, and they were shared with Britain. Britain has a very famous laboratory here, Porton Downs, which is the basic laboratory we rely on, that is America, for chemical and biological assessments, and their assessment was it had nothing to do with the sarin that exists in the Syrian arsenal.
Coming up in part 2 of Going Underground.
Since the end of the Cold War, any country, no matter how despotic, no matter how corrupt, if their leader said he would fight the Russians and it was anti-Russian, we would give them arms and guns.
Ukraine is under the spotlight in the second part of our exclusive interview with Seymour Hersh. Plus, in a week that the Police Service of Northern Ireland admits daily terrorist attacks in the 6 counties, we review the British press's scoop about the IRA's obsession with Jameson whiskey. All this and more after a short break. In the second part of our exclusive interview with Sy Hersh, he reveals more about the secret reasons for Western intervention in the Middle East and talks about the geopolitical power struggle behind NATO's backing of Western Ukraine. That means our own laboratory, Porton Down, was doing stuff, experiments on this stuff, when our politicians here in London were saying this is a red line that has been crossed.
All I can tell you is what I know. All I know is I did a study, and the study was relayed to the Americans. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff went to the president and said, this is right at the middle when he was talking about bombing, and he said that you don't have a case, it won't hold up. And the president then canceled the bombing and explained it by saying that the Syrians had agreed to give up their chemical weapons. But that had been an agreement that that was proffered a year earlier. In fact, the Russians were talking to us about it a year earlier, and we said at that time, I think the attitude was, why should we do anything that helps the Russians? We didn't do it. So the idea that the president's statement that the reason he didn't bomb was because Syria agreed to give up the arsenal is lunacy, because A, he was willing to do it a year earlier. I had written, in 2003, 2004, I remember spending time with Mustafa Talas, the defense minister for years of Syria. And I remember him telling me, I visited him at his home in Damascus, chemical weapons, oh God, can't wait to get rid of them. It's been written many times. And not only that, Syria doesn't have sarin. Syria stores, sarin you can't store. It breaks down, it's hard to keep. You store the components separately, and the components by themselves are inert. You have to meld them. And we monitor with the Israelis everything, and there was no warning. There's a million reasons why that story doesn't work. But when you get a narrative in the Western press, it's hard to break it, because the narrative was, it came out of the White House and came out of England, that it was bad, it was the Syrians, and that's the narrative. So it's very hard to change a narrative.
The only person trying to revive it maybe is the Pope, who said the chemical weapons were being sold to Syria recently. But now the new narrative is we must, and this happened in the past few days, David Cameron still reiterating the need to support moderate rebels. Robert Fisk recently saying he was down there and he didn't see any. Are there any?
Are you kidding? What's happened is, I think it's, look, I'm not going to pretend this is new information. Many of the secular, what they call the Free Syrian Army, FSA, have already cut deals with Bashar, particularly around Syria. There's still some troubles in Jobar in the south of Syria and East Ghouta. There's still holdouts, but many of the units around Damascus is quiet because Bashar said you can keep your weapons, you can have your own little fiefdom, but you have to pay allegiance to me. You have to recognize me. And they've cut that deal. They're cutting that deal. These are the true moderate groups. They've come in. There's nothing else for them. And so believe me, this idea of a free fire zone is an Erdogan idea. And Erdogan's the guy in a terrible spot right now because he's the guy that can't break with ISIS. There's clearly been...
Although he was with President Putin recently, which was quite a meeting in terms of what's happening in Syria, the meeting in Istanbul.
I wonder what was, that would be wonderful to have a fly on the wall there. But, I've had serious Americans tell me that what we should have done in 1979, 1980 is stay the hell out of Afghanistan. We'd been much better off. We decided we were going to fight the Cold War against the Russians in Afghanistan, and we used the Sunni fundamentalists, including bin Laden, to do so. And so we've replicated that because we've funded many of the original militias in Iraq, the ISIS that became ISIS now, were funded by us too.
And now we're hitting Russia on a new front, in a sense, Ukraine. Many people in Britain, let alone in the United States, saying this is a red line, Congress just passing that new law against Russia. What's your take on it?
Well, Jack Matlock was a former American ambassador to the Soviet Union and very much a realist, a very, very competent guy. And he was ambassador more than a decade ago. And he was asked that question. What he said was, asked about the Ukraine, he said, I think there's no reason, I never believe we should get involved in family fights. And there we are. That's just, it seems to me.
And we have been.
Oh, well, do I know something specifically? What I know is that since the end of the Cold War, any country, no matter how despotic, no matter how corrupt, if their leader said he would fight the Russians and it was anti-Russian, we would give them arms and guns. So there's been an American pattern of supporting the opposition. So clearly, I have no idea what justifies anything, but clearly the answer, there's one question is how much aid did we give to the Western Ukrainians? And don't forget, historically, Western Ukraine fought, something like 2 divisions fought in Stalingrad with the Nazis in World War II, and there's a lot of memories. And I just think it's so much more complicated, and there's so much more history, and we tend to overlook the history when we look at the issue. And my own view is that the key right now in the Middle East is Syria. That's the biggest game going right now is Syria, and if that goes the wrong way, we're in real trouble. If somehow, and I think there are many in America that know this, and what's going on now is really fascinating because it's right there in front of us, but we don't want to see it.
Thank you. Now to some grim news from Richard Desmond's Express.
Exclusive. Al-Qaeda plot to blow up 5 passenger planes in Christmas spectacular.
Yes, the paper says that a terror strike on the UK is now almost inevitable and that the threat has been taken so seriously it came close to leading to an outright ban on all hand luggage. No one at the Express thought to ask if they didn't ban hand luggage on planes because the attack is inevitable, then we're all going to die. As for people who are dying, Viscount Rothermere is more interested in the plight of flags.
Ferguson demonstrators set fire to American flag outside police department in another restless night of protests.
Yes, the Daily Mail is worried about flags on fire. It will no doubt be the same when it comes to the New York demonstrations about the death of Eric Garner. Less prominent maybe will be Washington Post reprinted statistics that a black boy or man is killed by police or vigilantes every 28 hours in America. But then the Mail's sister paper, Rothermere's Metro City newspaper, is more concerned with flags too.
Moment US airstrike obliterates black ISIS jihadi flag flying on Syrian hilltop.
A horrific photo of an explosion accompanies this headline in the Metro, and we can assume that obliteration of the ISIS flag is the salient fact here, not any civilian collateral damage. Unlike what the Irish Independent News and Media's Belfast Telegraph reports about alleged British torture.
Ireland accuses UK of torture as new hooded men probe is sought.
Somehow very few papers based in London wanted to cover this story about Ireland's intentions to reopen landmark human rights cases in Europe over UK torture. Well, it would ruin the narrative of papers like the Murdoch Sun, which blamed the Troubles all on the IRA, wouldn't it? Though they have made time to mention the Provos.
Garda chasing 15,000 bottles stolen by IRA.
Ah, the old drunken Irish stereotypes are more interesting than British torture. This year's Turner Prize has just been awarded to a work allegedly inspired by Marxism. Could it be a reflection of increasing political awareness in contemporary art? With me is Italian sculptor Davide Dormino. He's the artist behind a planned set of life-size bronze sculptures of whistleblowers Edward Snowden, Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. Fundraising for his project, Anything to Say, is taking place right now on Kickstarter. Check their website for details. Welcome, Davide, to Going Underground. Tell us about the project.
I'm very happy to be here, for sure. This project starts from a very simple idea. It's something about courage and freedom. Art has the great power to help people to grow up, to evolve. And public art, it's a great chance to tell to everyone. So I decided to do this project and to choose these three figures because for me, they are three contemporary revolutionary.
They're being threatened by the United States and the British government, one of them, of course, being trapped in an embassy in Britain.
They break the system. They change everything of the world because they remind us how much is important, how is important to know the truth. So my responsibility, like artist, is to tell what's the world around me. For do that, I choose the chair like symbol because the chair is something that is very comfortable. And when we are comfortable, we know we don't evolve. We don't grow up. So we can use also the chairs for stay more high, for change our point of view. They choose the chair of courage. And in the sculptures, there's one empty chair that's it for each of us, and gave us the opportunity to stay close to there and to change our point of view.
Of course, public art in recent years, it's in corporations' headquarters. Big banks have public art sculptures outside them. Maybe the CIA headquarters, MI6, GCHQ, they have sculptures.
Yeah. But,
the role of public art changed recently.
Absolutely. I think that this artwork is for everyone. And every one of us have to support this project. The idea is that this sculpture could travel from country to country in the main square of the most important cities of the world, this idea. It's like a symbol. It's a sign that I would like to live for old people, for create discussion. Because it's important, the role of art is important when give us the possibility to make a question about our life.
I mean, we've heard American politicians threaten some with assassination. Bradley Manning is in jail.
Yeah, I know.
A long jail term.
I know. That's very, very sad because they've lost their freedom for that. So I think that we have to. This is the only way that we have to stay close to them.
You went to the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether you can tell us what Julian Assange thought of the project.
I met Julian Assange the last week because I expressed my desire to the journalist Charles Glass. It is the one that with me are working about the project.
War reporter.
Exactly. And we went there, and it was really strong for me because the place where he lived from 1900 days, it's very claustrophobic, because you've been there. But the feeling that I had was to stay close to someone that changed the world. Something like an hero for me.
You think galleries would be frightened of exhibiting the sculpture if it gets created?
I explained to him my project because he knows for sure, but he told me that the concept is very strong, and he told me also, I can help you, Davide, but I'm close to you about this.
So he didn't want to be too close to you as the independent artist.
Yeah.
For you. So you're using crowdfunding to create this?
Exactly. Just because I told you
How
before.
does that work for a piece of art?
We need 100,000
bids for
exactly.
it.
And all this money are for create the fusion in bronze of the sculpture and for move the sculpture in the main square. And we have one more month for arrive at the goal.
Corporate media, they've forgotten about them already.
Some of half-word thinks that they are traitors. So it's like a public execution if you see the sculptures, no? It doesn't mean in which way you want to stay. My idea is it's choose if you want to stay here or to this other side. But it's important to choose in life if we want to do something.
Davide Dormino, thank you.
Thanks.
That's it for today. We're back on Wednesday with the award-winning investigative journalist Duncan Campbell, who exposed the infamous Zircon affair. In the meantime, connect to us via Twitter, Facebook, SoundCloud, and email. And don't forget RT UK News with Bill Dodd every weekday evening at 6, 8, 9, and 10. See you on Wednesday.